For her family, Lucia was no different from the animal they used to have at home, because even an animal, the influence of these emperors extends so high that it's unreachable like the sky. The cold chief of the clan, to be the first stone in the master's revenge. Until now, his lord had explained only one rule to the boy. By his order, using magic or unsheathing outside of class is strictly prohibited. Vances was terrified. He couldn't even explain what the hell just happened. But moreover, the master wanted to hear explanations about what was happening now. He demanded that the boy explain himself in a way that could be understood. As expected, Lucia knew he would come without fail. The protagonist knew perfectly well what kind of person Ligren Fedlian was. There are only two ways to subdue those who are born to lead. Either you are born as their leader, or you receive power from someone superior to them. Ligren Fedlian is the second in command in the Rothbell house, the shadow of the leader and the main administrator of the house, and his closest advisor, the only one with the power to train the direct heirs. His word was law. Lucia knew that detecting Vance's unstable magic would be a piece of cake for him. Before, he would have shrunk back at the sight of Vances. He would lower his head in his presence. But now he had a totally different goal, with Ligren's permission. Guided the house to glory and prosperity, Duke Ego Rodbell, the youngest swordmaster and heir of the clan. The young woman was ready to explain everything for her brother. It was easy to see that Brother Vances was too affected by what had happened. A man like the administrator saw and understood everything perfectly, but he didn't even show a hint of concern for the boy who could have died by the sword and in this situation. All he cared about was correcting Vances, because ignoring the stupidity of the direct heir could open a gap in the clan. The problem was just that bastard they thought was useless and incapable. There was a possibility he could defend Vances and lie. Then Ligren might think that this bastard isn't so useless, asking not to punish his brother. Lucy said she was just trying to save him. Confusion appeared on Vances' face. He didn't know how to react. The administrator never imagined that a venomous snake would enter the house, but he still hoped the young master would. Add whatever he wanted. Not hearing a response, Ligren promised to tell everything to the head of the house. Thinking that her name might be necessary in this recap manhwa, Lucia pronounced it since she had witnessed everything that had happened. The administrator did everything in his power. It was enough for Lucia to be etched in Ligren's mind. Estio Rodbell was the commander of the most powerful magic cavalry order, Vances. Rodbell, the youngest son. No matter how long it took, the heroine's revenge began, and would reach the end for the Rothwells to see everything. Lucia couldn't process what had happened all night. It was the first time she spoke so loudly and clearly with those two. Before, she wouldn't even have dared to dream of something like that after Ligren's departure. Vances was furious with his sister. He demanded Lucia explain why she had lied, but in the young woman's eyes it showed she wasn't going to speak. As expected, Vances was just a silly kid. He shouldn't have thought for a second that she did it to help him. The heroine as a victim would never do that to please the aggressor. So his little brother wouldn't get his hopes up. The girl said she did it for herself because she didn't want to be dragged into a senseless mess with him. The direct heir didn't even realize how disgusting his false heroism was. It would be great if after all this he just left his sister alone. But expecting that was truly too naive, as Estio said. That his false heroism would be great if after all this he just left his sister alone. And the precious family treasure Miracle Rodbell filled with love and a magical gift. They were her dream and her most cherished desire, and although Lucia, but expecting that was indeed too naive, as Estio would say. The girl was just a convenient toy, nothing more. But now wasn't the time to get carried away by emotions, because the Ligren could have really reported about yesterday, and then it would surely be a call from the Duke himself. Everything went exactly according to Lucia's plan yesterday. As expected, the heroine was called to the Duke's office. She didn't even imagine that the administrator would take her to the office. Ligren Fedlian himself came for her, not a mere servant. He wanted to know what the girl meant when she said that yesterday. That time he overlooked it was more than enough. As expected, the administrator wasn't going to let it go like that. A tense situation, and the intervention of one-thirded could distort perception. Even the most sensible option taken at that moment. It's just the best possible decision. A normal person might not have noticed anything strange, but Ligren immediately sensed that something was off. He understood that her behavior could have been calculated in advance by someone else. Rodbell, the bastard of the Rodbell clan, was not like them. Contempt and humiliation looks of aversion followed her, but she endured it. And precisely for that reason, he decided to intervene personally. However, now wasn't the time to talk about it. Right now, Lucia just needed the administrator to remember her name. From the outside, it seemed like she had done all that just for him to remember her. If the girl were an ordinary maid, she wouldn't even dare to lie if Ligren hadn't recognized her. She would have simply accepted it, but little Rothbell was the daughter of the head of the house. And if her stupidity brought shame to her father's name, she wouldn't forgive it. That they hate her. That they don't recognize her. Lucia is still part of the Rodbell house. Ligren understood her, but stated that she was mistaken. Even the pride with which he said it wasn't something she had the right to say out loud. He asserted that in this house, even to show your own will, you had to ask for permission. This place has an owner, and that is the clan leader. The door has a special spell. Without the right of entry, you cannot access it. Only very few have the right to cross that threshold. Ligren and the chief's children. Even mentioning the chief's blood without his permission is an insolence now. The girl had neither the right nor the authority for that. So using force, the administrator dragged her through the portal, because she had a dream that helped her endure all her miseries waiting patiently. The mark engraved on her hand will disappear in an hour. Lucia could consider this a temporary opportunity. Now she had to prove that the efforts invested in her were not in vain. Emotional emptiness was the best word to describe Lucia these days. For the first time in her life, she had someone she could call that, so she couldn't reject her father's words even if all she received in return was disdain and ignorance. Now the protagonist fully understood how foolish she had been back then. By order of His Excellency, the girl finally met with him according to Ligren's report. The ruler heard that there was a commotion yesterday. It wasn't necessary for such nonsense to become gossip. The lord was exactly as Lucia remembered him, even if a snake nearly killed her. Even if advances almost caused a tragedy. For him, it was a priority to safeguard the honor of the Rothwell house. That's his cold way of leading this lineage. No one would hear the screams of an 11-year-old bastard. Knowing this, he still personally summoned the girl to warn her, just to root out even the slightest seed of rebellion. Lucia knew his way of thinking well. She believed that at least once they would notice her in this recap manhwa. Lucia couldn't even imagine how happy her lord was that she existed. So all of this was a torture of hope. A man so cold and relentless wouldn't exile her even if he considered her a disgrace. That meant there was a special reason for it. Lucia thought maybe it was because of the sincere love he felt for her mother, perhaps. That in some corner of his heart she still lived as his daughter. It was a desperate and stupid illusion. And he didn't allow the protagonist to completely sever that bond. It turned out to be part of his old plan, calculated for the emotional void. If the girl tried to escape or commit suicide, the whole plan would go to waste. That's why the father created the conditions for her to be able to, and have to endure. Lucia felt guilty for causing her unnecessary problems. In that case, the ruler threw her out without further ado. He got what he wanted from the girl. Now it was his turn. Everything came down to that one crucial moment. The girl had a single request for His Majesty Ego. He thought Lucia was overstepping, and he had already wasted too much time with her. Unexpectedly, the girl begged him to reject her as his daughter. The head of the family's gaze turned glassy, as if he didn't understand. Ego thought the girl didn't even comprehend what that meant. In 11 years, she finally heard what she longed for, the warm words of her father, his smile, all that she dreamed of. Lucia reached that decision after much reflection since she arrived at that house. She provoked an unusual reaction in the Duke. The plan worked. Of course, this wasn't precisely in his calculations, Ego. He knows what Lucia represents for the resurgence of the Rothbell. The protagonist was a girl with crimson eyes, possessor of a value. Her importance is not exchanged for anything because she is Lucia Rothbell. Therefore, it's time to put the pieces back in place. Ligren was very satisfied with his conversation with Duke Ego. Thanks to the administrator's care, everything went well for Lady Lucia. From her gaze, the girl knew he wanted to tell her something. For the administrator, that wasn't necessary. It seemed he already understood the outcome of his efforts. He believed that each person had a place according to their position, so he hoped Lucia would learn the lesson and think about where her place was. 10 minutes ago, it seemed the Duke was wasting time. There's nothing more useless than spending energy on something that doesn't deserve it. Ego made the decision that there would be no turning back. Desperate, Lucia begged him to reconsider his decision, but she had no right to opine on his choices. The girl thought the only way to avoid causing problems. She had finally achieved it, but the young girl had no idea why this was happening right now. Desperate, Lucia begged him to reconsider his decision, but she had no right to comment on his choices. The girl thought the only way to avoid causing problems was to renounce her kinship, and that's why she acted insolently towards her father again. He would make a decision after hearing the reason for that choice. If what he had planned for so long was based on the chaos of yesterday, that was a bad deal. Now, for such trivialities, she had to be prepared. Lucia begged because she was the only stain in her home. In fact, she understood this perfectly. A true Rottweiler fulfills its duty without ever failing, and thus elevates the honor of its house. In that, according to the heroine, lies the meaning of her being. Due to her immaturity, Lucia only embarrassed that name. Worse yet, for her doubt is born in others. About the correctness of the Duke's decision to accept her here, that's why the girl begged him, for the last time, to take away the title of daughter. As expected, it wasn't even worth thinking about for the Duke. He denied the request, and had no intention of hearing anything more about it in the Rothwell house. There can be no doubt about his decision, and Lucia was his decision to fulfill her duty. That was Lucia Rothbell's penance. She didn't expect him to accept it, but still it was a barrier. The only way to change the conditions in which Lucia lived there. Vances proposed not to delay any longer and to finish this as soon as possible. Even the hateful face of her brother was a decree from the Duke, making it clear that she was no longer an obsessive being, seeking familial love. To show how firm her will was, the heroine used the resignation letter of kinship, being just a half-bastard. She could never shake the Rothwell stronghold, which is why before the Rothwell aptitude test, she had to prepare thoroughly. Although the girl realized she had really overstepped, she knew the Duke wouldn't abandon her. But challenging his will was risky. There are countless ways to hold her here until the day of sacrifice. If Lucia remained alive, she could fulfill her designated role. But for her father, it would be an extreme measure. Since he was an intelligent man, he noted down security measures in case of a flight risk. He wouldn't leave. Even the slightest possibility of Lucia losing control. There was a curse over those who inherited the Rothbell blood. Born to transform achievements into fun, he was considered a bearer of the Rothbell blood for those who are born with the powerful Rothbell power. Soon a side effect appears and they experience it with the Black Death, like darkness opposed to its brilliance. It is impossible to determine what exactly triggers the collapse, and if no measures are taken with someone who loses control. Could be better than this defenseless girl stripped of rights if they had known from the start she would see for the last time today. Upon hearing his insolence, the older brother asked her to mind her words. This one will die. If Lucia collapses, she will have to choose a victim from her own family. First, she wanted to find a way to release the seal. Imposed on the evil god, he gave her the opportunity for revenge, and she had to fulfill what he desired. Therefore, she must go to the library where all the truths of this world come together. They said this place was built by the first head of the Rothbell who loved books following his will. Each leader invested resources in this place. Of course, not just anyone was allowed access. Today, the protagonist also had the right to enter. Inside, she was greeted by Jills, the librarian, ready to help her, but Lucia told him she had her own business in the library. The Smore clan servants of the Rothwell felt proud, especially Giles Esmore, a proud man who revered the Rothbells. He insisted that only those authorized by his lordship entered. Even though Lucia carrying the Rothbell blood didn't belong there, it was strange since her father had given her the name Rothbell, and the librarian had no authority to kick the girl out. Otherwise, she could. Although Steve thought he was right, time was really being wasted anyway. Interpret it as a rebellion against the chief's will for unsheathing his sword for such a lowly act. The father called Avances to his presence. It wasn't worth risking his position since the boy wasn't the direct heir because of a cheap toy. The father was scolding Vances. With that little girl, he was going to settle the score properly, the librarian Smore. He greatly longed to explain himself to Lady Lucia, justifying his action by saying he would never dare to challenge the will of the Duke. Smore tried to explain what had just occurred as a little misunderstanding. The young lady promised not to tell the Duke what happened, and she promised not to put him in a compromising position in front of the Rothbell clan. Knowing this man and how quickly he changes, she found this pathetic spectacle funny. She understood it was better to set boundaries in advance. The limits of the Rothwell clan's name, because to maintain control of the library, he would be capable of any lowly act. She still had a lot to search for in this place and couldn't allow him to interfere. Misunderstanding resolved the young lady, advised the librarian to return to his duties in the mansion. Rothwell continued bustling. Avances still couldn't find Lucia. It was time for Lucia to fulfill her duty to the end. The Rothwell siblings would continue being themselves. Pondering where she could be and getting furious, he went over all possible options while going up the stairs. He heard the conversation between Administrator Legren and Jace Smore, talking about how a wicked young lady had infiltrated the Rothwell library. Legren advised ignoring her visits, but being more careful with what they said because from today, his lordship has issued a new decree regarding Lady Lucia. From now on, she will be moved to the guest rooms, and the servants must treat her with honor. Terrified by such changes, Jace Smore couldn't understand what was happening. His fear was understandable, since until recently, they treated her worse than a servant. Seeing all this, Legren perfectly understood Jace's feelings. She used to seem like a silly, pathetic girl, but now everything has changed. Being part of the Rothbeal, the lady tried to understand for herself what it means to be a true Rothbeal. Lady Rothbeal, examining everything she could, found nothing she was looking for among all the books. There wasn't a single shelf related to the evil god. Asking Giles for help was unthinkable. They told their sister to jump into the abyss and die, all with such calmness. The abyss, precisely the one called Ivy's. Too dangerous. If the Duke found out, she had to settle for the fact that Giles had left. Thanks to that, she could find that hidden section of the library she had heard about. It was a room for those who passed the heir's trial. Directly and the initiation rite in the past. They didn't even let her dream of that trial, the verification of that trial itself. It was deadly dangerous, but she decided to complete it, even if the road was very long as the mark remained active. She had to explore this place as much as possible. She inspected the library while she had the chance to use this place. With so much freedom, her joy didn't last long. Vance burst into the library, threatening to teach her a good lesson. He grabbed her by the hand, but Lucia begged him to let her go and not waste time on nonsense. Vance expected a different reaction he was ready to show, the huge difference between the two to show her mercy and generosity, like the direct heir himself. Lucia reminded him of the heir the day before, and the punishment for his reckless act, threatening that if the administrator was a strict secret within the family. Centuries ago, the first Rothwell sealed an evil god in Avis. Legren found out he wouldn't forgive the same mistake. Banshee was left speechless, and Lucia rushed toward the exit. For a moment, the young man thought she was worried about getting scolded. The young man didn't know what she was thinking. Maybe she wanted him to be punished, fearing to look like a complete idiot. The hero ran to catch up with Lucia, losing control. He clenched his fists and, filled with rage, prepared to strike. Looking up, they saw a large number of books flying toward them. Everything happened suddenly. Vance lay on the ground, thinking about his shame. He felt no pain, and that couldn't be right if a mountain of books fell on him. Lucia, bleeding profusely, saved Vance, taking all the hits. He couldn't believe what he saw. If he just wanted to show who was boss, everything didn't end so tragically. His wounds weren't serious, and they called a doctor. After examining her, the doctor insisted on feeding her well and giving her healing infusions. From that moment on, she was assigned a personal maid named Marine. From now on, she would be the lady's guide and unconditional support. Here, he found the power that gave the Rothwell house power and glory. However, every 100 years, starting today, Lucia will live in the guest room on the 3rd floor. His Excellence has ordered that the girl be assigned the most beautiful room. The chef prepared exquisite dishes for her, and now the girl is invited to the table. Various dishes adorned her table, and she was pleasantly surprised before falling into the abyss. She had to settle for leftovers and dry bread she couldn't afford to savor and enjoy the taste of food, and after losing her taste, food became a means of survival. Lucia enjoyed the delicious food, feeling its amazing flavor. It was the first time she truly tasted food, and it was truly delicious judging by the empty plate. It was clear that it was the richest thing she'd ever eaten. After eating, Maureen went for the infusion, while the lady stayed thinking about life. The delicious food, the kindness of Maureen, all of that led her thoughts to the past. She remembered that person thanks to whom she was able to survive. Back then, it was the only person in the Rothwell house. The Rothwell family must sacrifice someone from their bloodline. Lucia couldn't believe how consistent they were. Then her efforts truly meant nothing. Who stood by her side at that moment and whom Lucia dreamed of seeing again without thinking much. She headed to the training arena of Clan Rothbell No. 1, where the magical knights trained, and among them, the first squadron of magical cavalry under the command of House Rothbell, the strongest in the entire continent. This arena belonged to that special squadron. For an ordinary kid, reaching the depths of this land was unthinkable, but for Lucia, it wasn't difficult. She had been here many times. The warriors of the first squadron radiated power and confidence in every movement. It was the genuine magical art of cavalry, from the Rothwell lineage. Impressive. Through a swearing ritual, they imbue their weapons with magic and dominated even a common soldier, is a master and rivals an experienced leader. The place was extremely dangerous. She had to exercise caution. Suddenly, a powerful young man appeared before her. He noticed her fear and calmed her. Chaos and danger reigned there. Weapons gleamed everywhere. The young man asked her to wait in a safe place, and after the battle was over, he approached. She knew her father surely wanted the same. Lord Ego did it to preserve the glory of the Rothwell lineage. He was sure that his noble self-sacrifice. It was Ian Rixes, the commander of the first squadron of magical cavalry during the fight. A warrior overstepped and caused an explosion of magic. The superior scolded him harshly for such recklessness and negligence with magic. Lucia saw that Alan hadn't changed at all, and was just as she remembered. The warriors couldn't imagine that a kid would appear in the arena. It was critical, after all. The first squadron must fight against monsters and not relax. The commander was strict, but behind that toughness was a man with a good heart. Someone asked the little lady how she'd come to this terrible place, even though he understood without explanations that her parents were to blame. He asked the girl to enter since this place was not safe at all. While they looked for her parents, Lucia agreed to stay in the waiting room. Alan immediately tasked the assistant to look for her parents. The encounter was awkward. The knight had nothing to offer her there, only men trained, so they didn't stock up much. It wasn't serious since the young girl usually drank green tea. It was clear she was more developed, would give meaning to her insignificant life. But if it was such an honor, Lucia proposed sacrificing her father's favorites instead of herself. Then she appeared, according to Ian. Calling her little lady was already a bit weird. Everything seemed terrifying. But as long as Lucci was there, she could relax. There was no safer place than this within Clan Rothbell, even if Sir Rixus seemed otherwise. He had a lot of strength. Every word of his filled with care and attention was so warm that the heroine barely held back tears, precisely because he was like this. She couldn't allow herself to cry. The commander of the first squadron of cavalry, Ian Rixes, knew perfectly well who that girl was. And now she wanted to know why he had been hiding it from her. The arrogant Sir Yen thought he was pretending well enough, but apparently he ended up giving himself away after all, in the ancestral lands of the Rothwells. It's impossible not to know about Lucia's existence. However, the commander never tried to deceive her with bad intentions. Without realizing it, Alan became furious at the irresponsibility and cruelty of that clan no matter what happened. In front of him, there was only a girl who needed protection. Knowing the conditions Lucia was forced to live in gave him no peace. Especially after the girl almost suffered harm today, the Lord knew he had crossed the line and thought that at least there, the young girl wanted to offer miracle as a sacrifice, unable to bear such words. My lady would have the chance to rest, but there was still no excuse. He deceived her, and that was wrong. The commander of the night squad of the house, Rothwell, sincerely apologized to the bastard. If anyone else had done it, the girl would have thought it was another lie. But Alan, a man with a good heart, had always been like that with her in his past life. His encounter with her began when he had nothing to do with her. The commander found my lady beaten, and hiding in a corner of the training field, Lucia was shattered. But he didn't ask anything. The Lord just offered to take her if she had nowhere to go. At first, the protagonist didn't believe he would always wait for her. But when things got really tough, she remembered his words and then determined the girl returned to that place. At that moment, Alan was incredibly happy to see her again. A man with a big heart simply welcomed Lucia warmly. The girl accepted his apologies, but in return she wanted to propose something, judging by the commander's face. It was clear it was unexpected. Someone else was also to blame, so he at least decided to listen to her. That for them, she was just a victim destined for a ritual. They saw her as a used and discarded object. The head of the family slapped the young girl. No one in his presence would dare to utter the name of his girl. The girl's only wish was for him to become her fencing master. It was so strange that the Lord thought he was hallucinating. He didn't expect Lady Rothwell to have a talent for scaring people. The commander regretted it. And under different circumstances, he would have accepted. But he simply couldn't give his consent to this proposal. Alan by principle didn't take on apprentices, and he couldn't allow himself to do so. This harsh refusal from Alan was actually the most sensible thing he could do with his character. He could protect the child that the whole clan despises. However, becoming a tutor to a bastard publicly is another level. The direct instruction of the commander affects the fight for the inheritance. If Alan were a normal knight, he would gladly pass on his skills to the girl. Even if he had to pay for it, it would be an honor, not a burden. But the commander led the first squad, and knew that with the slightest mistake, they would crush the weakest. He had lived it himself where greed reigned. Envy, malice, and filth were just the shadow of power when it came to the inheritance of the great Rothwell clan. The family showed mercy towards Lucia despite considering her inferior. The terrible truth. The situation is worse. Lucia understood his concern but didn't see it as a problem. As a bastard, she couldn't aspire to inheritance or the throne. She just needed 3 months of constant training the test to be part of the Rothwell clan. Would be in 3 months. Lucia promised to take care of almost everything if Ion found the time. But the commander wasn't recruiting apprentices, and he wasn't going to give in to convince him the girl promised to find Ayla's medical treaty. If it exists, it will help cure Ion's daughter's illness. That was the young bastard's response to his question. It was said that Ayla was called Santa, left her knowledge written in the treaty before she died. It's a legendary secret work whose existence isn't even confirmed. It's believed that this treaty could make everything that medicine is capable of possible. However, Alan thought he had better chances of finding it in the Rothbell vault to save his daughter. He enlisted in the Rothbell family knight order. Moreover, he carefully concealed its existence to protect it from any threat. First of all, the commander wanted to know who instigated the girl to do that. Was that she was also his daughter? If only they had thought of her once, they couldn't have acted that way. And who dared to involve his daughter in all this? Furious, he demanded an answer before things went too far. Sir Ian Rixus's explosive reaction was totally understandable. However, Lucia believed that he shouldn't allow that behavior anymore. He should think about the reason why he had put up with everything for so long. Lucia didn't want him to ruin everything over a single situation. His main task was to focus only on one thing: how my lady could help him. And that meant she could save his daughter, not even as the squad leader was. He allowed access to the restricted section of the archive. This place is only open to direct heirs. Lucia would swear by the Rothwells that no one else knew Agent's secret. He couldn't tell everything, but assured that his silence wasn't malicious. The girl didn't ask for more. This time she really wanted to help. Commander Rixus was facing a crossroads between 2 paths: fight until the end, buying time to evacuate the villagers, or ignore the impending tragedy and retreat. Saving the night order someone chose, to sacrifice himself to save both the order and the civilians, he alone held back the monster attack. However, the cruel ego never considered her his daughter. To her father, the girl was a stain, a mistake he endured for a day, to buy crucial time. Thanks to his bravery, countless lives were saved in that moment of victory. He only thought about his beloved daughter Cherish, but ironically, he couldn't save his own life. That noble sacrifice was honored with a solemn and grand funeral. Meanwhile, his daughter Cherish, abandoned and unknowingly died of illness and hunger. There was a reason why Sir Ian's last wish was not fulfilled. The companions, consumed by grief, needed time to recover. Moreover, the nanny taking care of Cherish suffered a terrible accident. Lucia did not consider this series of unfortunate events normal. The man who gave everything for others had a cruel end to his story. No matter what happened, the girl couldn't allow this to continue. She decided to be the hope for Lord Alan and his daughter. However, the commander still couldn't understand what was happening. Even if someone recognized his daughter, it was impossible to reach the treaty. Doubts tormented him about whether he really had a lady in front of him. Everything is confusing. He didn't tell anyone about his daughter yesterday. Speaking of all this, Lady Lucia looked very sad. This girl seemed on the verge of crumbling to dust. She held the pain in her chest with all her strength. He was convinced that only her death would benefit the Rothwell house. The protagonist was disgusted, deciding to interrogate her. Someone realized that he truly was getting old. The girl just needed to respond to his words. The heroine promised to personally deliver the treaty to Ayla, but she shouldn't worry if the girl didn't pass the test, because her mentor would be none other than Sir Ian Rixus. In that case, he hoped for a fruitful collaboration with Lady Lucia. Before getting to the point, it was wise to clarify the situation with their differences. The commander wasn't going to ask how the lady discovered his secret, and if his secret was revealed, the blame was entirely his. On the contrary, he respected the determination with which Lucia approached the matter. If she had wanted to blackmail him, she wouldn't have taken such a risk. Not long ago, the girl said she drank green tea without problems, but this tea has a very strange taste. After all, Lucci still looks like a child in his eyes upon arriving at the training field. The girl held her breath for a moment. A lot awaited them ahead. It's not just grueling. Lucia will learn everything. She had to learn everything necessary for the inheritance test. This exam is an evaluation of the heir's abilities. That they would want to use even her death, but escaping from them was impossible. The girl had not a shred of magic. And to pass it, one needs not only strength, but also extensive knowledge. With Lucci's sharpness, she won't have problems studying. But with physical conditioning, Ian feared it would be difficult. Endurance couldn't be built up in just a couple of days. That's why the commander thought this would be especially hard for the girl. Lucia had never learned to use a sword and didn't claim to be in good shape, but she was capable of training much harder than the others. The girl promised to give her all every day, even if it was tough. They needed to hold on a little longer. However, the commander didn't understand anything the young woman was saying. He was just sharing the problems they had to face. They must understand their weaknesses to know how to move forward. Alan wasn't going to train without a plan and proper preparation. Lucia felt bad for forcing him to look for extra time, because of her time was indeed one of the problems they needed to solve. So the master proposed to the lady to be his official disciple. It wasn't a temporary 3-month agreement, as she had suggested. They had a complete mentor-apprentice relationship approved by the Duke. Shortly after Lee Grinferland unexpectedly visited them, he apologized for arriving without notice. However, hearing those words from the administrator was almost offensive. Searching for her father and brothers, Miracle arrived at the sacrifice ritual. The father did not expect her arrival. At that moment, someone noticed how Lucia's face changed upon his arrival. There was too much dust there, so he suggested going somewhere else. However, Ligrin requested to postpone the conversation for another time today. He only came to clarify a small detail. Young Lady Rothwell should have foreseen the consequences of her actions. Her thoughtless actions led to certain repercussions. Maureen, who didn't even know where she was, found herself in an uncomfortable situation. And the employee, instead of training, was forced to waste an entire day on this mainly because of the girl. She was wasting the commander's valuable time. The value of time wasn't remotely the same for everyone, therefore Ligrin ordered them to stop bothering and prepare to return. Every minute now was worth gold, and Lucia had to apologize. Furious, someone suddenly shouted for them to stop right there. The one to blame here wasn't Lady Lucia at all, but someone else. The master was sure the administrator knew who they were talking about from the start. It seemed that the Rothbell, the girl was very frail. Miracle didn't want to be apart for a moment. Her family was ruthless. Wouldn't lift a finger for whatever the lady did. Even the staff acted exactly the same way here if you think about it. The lady acted as always and they criticized her for it. Alan claimed that the Rothbell didn't give her freedom but confinement. And all this towards a girl who had just turned 9. The master only wanted to warn in case someone might misunderstand everything. But he was talking about those who truly represented a problem. He hoped his words hadn't offended the administrator. But Lucia was guilty in the end since the administrator came for her. She could only move freely because the mansion was safe. Promising to be more careful in the future, the girl apologized as well. Alan mentioned that this was a truly joyful day. Ligrin hoped the commander's decision would benefit the Rothbell family. Soon, Lucia prepared to listen to sermons on the way. However, everything ended too calmly. Even the administrator struggled to contradict Alan, the key piece of the house. In another situation, Ligrin wouldn't back down, but today he had no choice. To argue with Alan and try to challenge his words would be to admit that fact. Such disgrace couldn't be allowed for the ducal honor. What the father least wanted was to take his daughter to that horrible place. While everyone was distracted with Miracle, standing in front of the room door, Lucia thanked the company and promised to keep Maureen updated on everything that happened. However, the butler didn't ask what was on her mind now, but if the young lady decided to go further, that would be too much. The butler told her to be content with what she had. Now, if she started wanting more, she would risk losing even what she had worked hard for. Lucia recalled those words. They were for her own good. She didn't know if they were advice, but the tone sounded unusual. Whatever it was, the young lady didn't plan to stop. Everything was going as planned. Furthermore, luck was on her side. She was offered to be an official student, and it hadn't been easy to earn that position. For the heroine, the ultimate test of the Rothbell clan awaited her by the Lord's order. The commander of the first magical squad arrived. Ian Rixus solemnly greeted the head of the Rothwell clan. The commander planned to speak with Ego, to take someone as a personal disciple. Until recently, he himself thought that this didn't interest him at all. But everything changed the moment he met her. Maybe her skills aren't amazing, but there are much more important things like kindness. Lucia decided to escape. However, a strange force repelled her body backward. She resisted. The strong will and insight that Lucia possessed made it unforgivable to miss the chance to guide a girl with those virtues. Lord Rixus was sure that the girl would become great. That's why he requested to be allowed to take the lady as his personal pupil. The clan chief never imagined hearing something like that, because not even did it occur to him that they were referring to his own daughter. However, Alan knew that the chief didn't even consider that option for him as Duke. There were those who didn't meet his standards. Not long ago, Ian Rixus would have given anything to be a knight of the Rothville, but Lord Ego ordered that he be removed from his sight immediately, because for him, that kind of people was nothing but trash on the side of the road. Thanks to that supposed encounter, Alan reached this position with gritted teeth. He didn't expect an easy approval from someone like that if necessary. He's willing to risk his position as commander. However, his lordship allowed the commander to decide for himself that someone expressed their will for the first time is the best proof that he trusts his choice. Now he had to properly train Ego's daughter. Miracle, the commander thought from the beginning, because feelings aren't invested in objects. On her birthday, her own sister betrayed her, but a deep abyss seemed to swallow her. No one noticed that Mira used magic and pushed her sister, that the chief had agreed so easily, and it turns out that the Duke never thought about considering Lucia as his daughter. However, the person that Alan wanted to take as an apprentice is Lady Lucia. Before the important event, Marin worked hard on Lucy's hairstyle. They changed clothes so many times that the girl lost count. Yesterday, thanks to my Lady Marin, she got into trouble. But today, everything was going well as an apology. Lucia fulfilled all of Marin's wishes since morning. But a strange feeling didn't leave her at all. It's just one of the tests that the young girl must overcome. It's been a long time since she was last called. However, now the heroine was ready for the meeting with her brother and the manager. Ligren's presence is understandable, but Vance's was also there now. Vance's just wanted to know what this mixed girl had done wrong again. If her father called her during working hours, it means it's something extraordinary. Vance's assumed that the girl hit her head and forgot where she was. Suddenly the boy acts like he cares. It seemed like he really felt a bit of guilt for the incident. Someone with the name Rodbell can't forget where they are. On the contrary, Lucia thought that Vance had forgotten. For the noble Rodbell lineage, the girl bid farewell forever to Lucia, the young woman whose life was insignificant. Otherwise, she wouldn't shout like that since that day. The presence of that girl in this house becomes more palpable. Having inherited the blood of the clan chief, she carried that potential. But soon, she will understand it for herself. The burning desire will burn her to ashes. Ligren understood that not everything was lost yet. It's not too late to think why this place is named Rothbell. 10 minutes before the meeting, Ego discovered that Lucia was the master's disciple. The boss didn't believe Alan was insignificant enough to yield to fate. Alan patient and capable of waiting. He wanted to get what he truly desired in this recap manhwa, so he asked if the commander had really thought it through. After all, it could be an impulsive and fleeting decision. Dictated by emotions, someone seemed to be standing on thin ice, ready to break at any moment. Worried that Lucia had lived all this time under such a cold gaze thanks to his lordship's reminder, the commander reaffirmed his decision. A duty passed down by the clan chief that had never been violated before. The commander of the cavalry order has the right to take an apprentice from the heirs. Once in his life, therefore, just wanted to be part of the family. In total darkness, Lucia fell into the arms of the very Lord of Evis. The commander of the first squadron requested permission to take Lucia as an apprentice. 10 minutes later, Vances and Lucia arrived at the father's office. Everything had gone much further than the protagonist expected. Watched them for too long, and knew his body language well. Someone is tense right now more than ever. The Duke shows such strong emotion for the first time. It was the opportunity that Ayan got betting too much. The father knew that Lucia Rodbell wanted to learn fencing from the commander. Under other circumstances, she should be punished for her boldness. But at Ayan's request, the Duke decided to give her a chance to dispel doubts in a week at the training ground. He hoped she would win the duel. And for that, of course, she needs a worthy opponent. Vances Rothbell. The youngest son will be Lucia's opponent, and was very surprised by what he discovered. The contest will be in a week. It was ridiculous to compete with a girl who had never wielded a sword. That is the price of this contest. A single word is not enough to win. When the Rothwell learned to use the sword, this test did not exist. Vances was a fencing genius unmatched among his contemporaries, defeating the one who would lead the magical knight squadron. This was a very, very interesting find for the evil god born in the Red District. It's crazy. As soon as the fight starts, he'll defeat Lucia instantly, finally. The girl is allowed to decline the duel with Vances, but on the condition that if she refuses, the fencing teacher is not the commander, but any other knight. But even if Lucia decides to have a duel with Vances, no one will stop her. And if she loses, she will never have the chance to learn fencing in this house. Lady Lucia had to make a decision. If she accepted the fight, she would lose her only opportunity, because it's a trap from the Duke, and whatever she chooses, everything will go as he wants. The young woman made a decision and accepted the duel with Vances. Vance was furious about this, since his father had given him a chance, and it seemed to him that her decision was a mistake. The reason the young woman wanted to learn fencing, despite the opportunity her lordship had given her, was Commander Rixus, who believed in her potential and worked hard for her, and now she must also be willing to a lot, and so the decision and the answer for her highness were made. Lucia will begin her training for the duel with Vans in the meantime. The crown prince of the Arpadel Empire, Bedel of Nav Arpadel, learns about the duel, and now the prince longs to. The young girl didn't even know who her parents were. Her precarious existence as a 9-year-old girl depended on charity. Meet Lucia. The lady returned home, and as always a delicious dinner awaited her, along with Marine, who was worried about her. During the tasty lunch, my lady decided to share her news with Marine. Marine didn't want the young master, Vances, to be Lucia's opponent at all, but my lady received a proposal that challenges all common sense. Therefore, she had no choice but to accept it, because what she desired can only be obtained by overcoming this injustice. And most importantly with her is someone who believes in her and gives her strength and confidence. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the commander appeared before Lucia for an important conversation, despite the possible losses. The commander offered her a valuable opportunity to meet expectations, and she hoped that in that conversation, he wouldn't doubt her at all and would believe in her. With a cup of strong tea that Marine prepared for them, the mentor began the conversation. She heard what she never wanted to hear from the commander, because she had hope for his words. She understood that she couldn't possibly defeat Lord Vances in any way, because they catastrophically lacked time to prepare. A biting cold pierced her body like knives, sure that it would end her miserable life. Ivans has real talent. The commander told her that the rules of combat had changed. And if the Duke imposed his will first, then the commander also has the right to insist a little on his own. The results of the negotiations were announced, and the Duke approved these conditions. The use of magic is strictly prohibited, and to avoid injuries, a spell will protect the participants. The victory conditions for Vances Rodbell were that if the tip of his weapon touches Lucia's neck or chest, the victory conditions for Lucia are if the edge of her weapon touches. Any part of Vances Rothwell unexpected and quite generous in the victory conditions. Surely the Duke has a plan. By accepting such demanding conditions, he is creating a debt with him, and at the same time preventing a major conflict. Even if he gives those advantages, he is deeply sure that Vances will not lose under any circumstances. However, it is unknown what results his desire to gain an advantage and a plausible excuse will lead to. And most likely this will affect that person who will remain forever in his memory. Here lies the commander of the First Order of Magical Knights, Ian Rixes. Meanwhile, banshees upon learning of the battle in a week with Lucia. But when Lucia opened her eyes, she lay in the warm annex of the Rothbell house. She had no idea why they had saved her. Ran toward Selak. Furthermore, he bet that his question about obtaining. She ran toward Selak. What's more, she bet that her question about obtaining the status of an official student of the first squad would get answered. Shelak already knew there would be a duel and was waiting for the young man for that very reason. He was her fencing master and knew everything related to banshees. The second commander of the Magical Knight Squad was Galak Malid. Vances didn't understand why Commander Allen chose Lucia as the official student and not him. On top of that, this girl didn't choose the easy path, but for some reason made an absurd choice. He didn't understand what was going on and expected some explanation from Selak. The master had an opinion that it all stemmed from the fact that they both came from the lowest and humblest backgrounds. Galak Malid didn't know what they were thinking, but he could somewhat imagine the Duke's reason. We could only guess what the teacher meant. Galak handed him the rules that would apply. In the next duel, it was hard to call it a regular duel. The conditions were skewed to one side. Seeing these conditions, Galak thought that Lady Lucia could defeat Vans, the gap between Vans and Lucia. Now that didn't matter. The girl was no longer hungry. She had a place to shelter from the cold. It's so obvious that even the Duke knows it. But if that's the case, why hype everything up so much with such a clear outcome beforehand? The answer to this question is simple. This is punishment. The father tasked the young master. To carry out an important mission, one must punish those who do not know their place and covet what does not belong to them. Moreover, he wants to see how the young man destroys this bastard from the roots. Wands was worried he could meet his father's expectations. With such an important task, but his teacher Salak is by his side and he has nothing to worry about. It seems that in the near future, Wands will need to learn something beyond swordsmanship, but also how to deal with commoners. More effectively, even if we talk about the noblest motives of the art of war, its essence boils down to inflicting wounds. That's why one must always remember this essence, not lose vigilance or attention, because tragedies are caused by those who succumb to the temptation of brute strength and become monsters. It seems that after all she has heard, the lady will never forget this lesson. These invaluable words will become a guide for her. And that already seemed like a dream. And when they told her she had a family, the protagonist felt like she had won everything. They finished the theory, and now it's time to put everything into practice. To win, you need to know who the enemy is and who you are. The training was going great. The young woman was super smart and learned instantly. The girl admitted that in strength and skills, she was below Vances. Both sides knew it, and therein lies her great advantage. Those who believe themselves invincible will show a weakness, arrogance, and that crack will be the key to their victory. It's about turning the carefreeness of those monsters into an opportunity and to take advantage of it. We need to analyze thoroughly and repeat without rest. First, we must order the situations Lucia might face in combat. Imagining unknown circumstances, thoughts easily go to the negative side, and thinking objectively becomes virtually impossible. We can discard the word duel and simply focus on the encounter with Vances, for it is essentially a battle where just one precise hit is enough for victory. Analyzing it this way, the choice becomes obvious. The lady will use the spear. There's no better weapon for the duel, but the Duke might not approve. Now she understands the meaning of that clause with the condition of her victory. The lady was very worried, and for that naive faith in the possibility of happiness of a bastard punishment arrived. But her master made sure that no rules were broken in the Rothwell house, where they honor the art of war. They do not favor one weapon over another. The spear is the favorite option for many knights. And if they start to criticize, the Duke will be in an awkward situation, it turns out. Having an ally gives you a huge boost of confidence. And if Ion chose the spear so firmly, she won't argue by evening. Lady Lucia returned to the Rothwell house. Marin, seeing the girls' bruised and battered hands, hurried to treat them. And the table was set. The chef prepared a delicious dinner. Everyone was eagerly waiting for Lucia, but the restless girl wanted to train even at night. Alan insisted on resting, because resting is also part of training. So there was nothing to be done. Her body was no longer responding, and they had to bandage her hands. So resisting would be useless since the lady couldn't move. She mentally reviewed everything she had learned. Alan decided on the spear mainly because it offers a much greater distance than the sword. To attack Vances with the sword, she would have to enter his attack range, giving him the chance to subdue Lucia by throwing her into the abyss and leaving her to die in the dark. She didn't want that at all, and wished with all her soul that they would be unhappy. It was hard. When a year had passed since her arrival at the mansion, Vances locked her in a room with a viper. The girl begged them to open the door, curled up in horror. However, if she has a spear, she can maintain a safe distance and attack without problem staying out of his reach, defending herself and containing him at the same time. Plus, Vances has little experience against spearmen, which means he will expose himself more often. It turns out the proposal is really advantageous, as long as the skill difference is tolerable. After all, she took a spear for the first time today, and it's clear that Vances won't give up easily. Therefore, before the duel, she must fully master everything she has learned today. If the pain and hardness of training can serve as a springboard, she will accept them joyfully. That's why Lady Lucia is sure she will overcome all of this. Without a doubt, the young girl was so tired that in Marin's warm arms, she simply fell asleep. Marin took Lucia to the bedroom, and seeing that girl, wished to stop everything, but was unable to change anything. Even though he wished with all his heart, Alan insisted a lot that Lucia's care be of the highest level. He ordered the maid to feed her well, do everything to make her comfortable, but to be quiet, since sweet comforts and pitying looks from the personal maid. The door only opened when Lucia poisoned herself with the venom and was barely clinging to life. In response, won't help the lady in battle, as she had to think about what true service to the lady consisted of. She herself understood that someone worthy was the one who could really help. She had no choice, and could only care for the girl as was fitting. The next morning, the girl went back to training, and halfway there, it started to rain heavily. She had no umbrella, and Lucia couldn't go back home. She was afraid of being late for training, and since she didn't have to go very far, she decided to just run in the rain on the way. She ran into the captain of the Second Order of Magic Knights. Sir Selak cursed he knew him, since he was especially close to Captain Alan. Selak spoke of Captain Alan with no respect, telling Lucia that he was secretly raising a girl supposedly the same age as Lady Lucia and calling it a disgusting hobby. There it is. The true face of Ayen Rixes, whom everyone revered, thought Lady Selak. She didn't know how to express her joy that Ayen was no longer alive. The girl was furious at those words and how he mocked the dead and laughed at their death. But Selak just laughed and reminded Lucia that, judging by his clothes, he was heading to training. The father said that such acts could bring trouble to the boy. Then Lucia finally understood, and about how the young lord was also diligently preparing for the duel. They would both be a great mutual boost, and for Selak. It was the hope of a bright future for their clan, and precisely because of that, Lucia's heart was breaking with pain. And yet this pathetic idea of the duel was organized with a predetermined outcome just for Ayen to solidify his position. Using the pure heart of the young girl, if a miracle happens and the lady wins, all the glory will go to him. But if she loses, who will judge him? And suddenly Selak, without showing a hint of shame, asked for help from how many people he had deceived, humiliated, and used. To now utter those words, how deep must he have sunk into his dirty business to climb to his current position, stepping on others without hesitation? And this monster did all this for his own benefit. He, without remorse, inflicts pain for his own peace. Lady Lucia said goodbye to the captain, thanking him for his time. But the captain didn't want to end it, and called it a submission. Lucia already knew who was the best the captain. Ayen Rixes, the wicked. Selak accused her of not knowing her place, said horrible things that people like her only need fear. That only fear is the cure for the ignorant, and in his opinion, the lady could use that bitter pill. The terrified girl said nothing and didn't see Ayen approach. That she would never be part of his family. For some reason, she couldn't let go of that last thread of hope. The protagonist fell into the abyss, but upon waking, he ordered Selak to stay away from the lady immediately. To the villain, these morning incidents only amused him, and he suggested to the commander to calm down. He called his meeting with the lady a coincidence, and that he hadn't understood things well as a gentleman. He couldn't ignore a fragile young woman seeking refuge from the rain. Alan asked the lady if what the second commander said was true, and if he did anything that could threaten her, he would make Selak answer for it. The girl already knew that Selak and Ayen had a tense relationship, but even considering that, Ayen wouldn't behave so emotionally. Probably the master knows something about him that the young lady doesn't know. Precisely for that reason, this man cannot be allowed to take the initiative. This meeting at dawn shouldn't be thought of as something casual. The Duke had just issued a decree that improves the situation of the bastards. And yet from Selak emanated an unmistakable thirst for blood. It seems that all of this is a well-orchestrated plan. The girl lied and told Alan. Everything Selak said was true, and Selak understood that she was trying to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. She was still alive and couldn't shake the feeling that her whole body was floating in this place where the evil dwelled. It was her, that same bastard he knew now. She's like a copy of the young Amonestio, whom the Duke values so much. Selak asked permission from the commander to leave, saying the misunderstanding was resolved. The commander hurried to formally apologize to Selak for today's rudeness, to which Selak replied that it was quite natural, since it was the first time he accepted a student, and Selak said goodbye, with his hope of seeing us on duel day. Ayen rushed over to Lucia, worried about whether she was okay, calming his commander. The girl said Jax hadn't hurt her, but Ayen couldn't believe it, and wondered what could have happened between them. Selak always stayed calm no matter the challenge, but today someone saw him lose his cool. The commander recalled how years ago Selak fixed an accident in a duel, and as a result his closest comrade was left paralyzed. He was so furious with Selak that now he didn't plan to leave him alone. Yes, that happened that day, and then he showed such weakness. It seems that this duel could be the opportunity to completely crush him, and the day of the duel arrived. Lucia and Vance were in the hall, along with their fencing masters, Lady Lucia Rodbell, and the commander. God looked nothing like the other side. The Master of Darkness immediately noticed the timid young girl Lucia finally arrived at the place where a gloomy reigned. Of the 1st Magical Cavalry Squad of the Imperial Order, Agent Rixes Vances Rodbell and Selak Malid, 2nd Commander of the Cavalry Squad Fencing Master. The Duke Rodbell couldn't miss such a significant event, and he showed up at the palace with him to watch the duel. The youngest daughter of the Miracle Rodbell family also came. At such a crucial moment, Vances couldn't disappoint his father, but he felt even more responsibility toward his little sister, who believed in his victory. Miracle heard that he was going to participate in the duel and asked her father to let her come, however. The only person among everyone who supported Lucia was Alan. He ordered the girl to show everyone who she really was before the duel started. Ligrin took on the responsibility of explaining the rules. As previously announced, both participants will have a protective spell to prevent injuries. The collars were an amulet, so they shouldn't worry about pain or serious injuries for the young master. Victory will be touching the chest or neck of the girl with the tip of his sword, and victory for Lady Lucia. Of Darkness was well known to the evil god sealed in Avis. However, in her situation, his essence was not what mattered now, is touching any part of her opponent's body. Also, the rivals were waiting for a weapon prepared by the commanders, especially for them. Vances advised Lucia to check her weapon well, so she wouldn't say later that it was the sword's fault. Besides, she had a spear, something unacceptable for someone who trained in fencing. However, it wasn't up to Vances to decide on the admissibility, but to the head of the Rothbell clan ego. Rothbell declared that the girl did not break the rules, so they could continue. No complaints about the choice of weapon, or its proportionality would be accepted. The only thing they had to keep in mind was the honor of the Rothbell lineage, and they couldn't disgrace it in this fight. When the duel began, Vances decided that Lucia wanted to take this to the end. It was ridiculous. The young man wasn't even angry, he was laughing. Before it was too late, he suggested asking for forgiveness from his father, and maybe he would show mercy. Ayen was right. Vances had no experience fighting against a spear, and the proof was that he was already within Lucia's reach after all. That was the only way the heroine had to learn something. Aiming at her opponent, Lucia was confident of her victory. The girl was so dull that even the god wasn't interested in playing with her. Vances couldn't believe Lucia Rothbell almost hit him with a spear. Just one more moment, a minimal hesitation, and the duel would have been over for the boy. None of this made sense. It was impossible. Lucia, in his opinion, was born to exasperate people. What opinion would she have of him to dare aim her spear at him? Instead of fleeing, Vances said silly things with a serious face. But this wasn't a game. Moreover, his defense was so obvious that the girl simply made a small feint, but apparently her movement surprised the great swordsman immensely. A proud guy like Vances, when it came to martial arts, went crazy at the humiliation. Forcing him to keep up with Lucia was the first step of her strategy. Everything was going according to plan, and each move laid the groundwork for Lucia's victory. Watching their duel, Miracle thought they were both simply amazing. Especially Lucia, she was impressive, fighting on equal terms with her brother. The young heroine was doing much better than expected, handling her weapon perfectly. It didn't matter if he was an evil god or a god of death. He was coming to take her life anyway. That was unchangeable. Even if it was just a well-thought-out strategy, its application in real combat was impressive. Alan didn't forget that the lady had an ace up her sleeve. But if the fight dragged on, Vances would win, the master of Vans. Noticed that his student's initial recklessness and Lucia's skill caught him off guard. But not for long, because no matter how much the bugs tensed in his brain for the young master who had already adapted to the situation, his impulsive attacks meant nothing. Vans wasn't going to fight her seriously, and had even embarrassed himself in front of his father. And now, by cutting his spear, he hoped Lucia would finally understand that she no longer had a chance to defeat him. The girl, aiming the spear at her brother, was already a miracle, an incredible achievement. But the heir was already tired of the game and now planned to instill terror in the girl. Selak was sure that even though magic protects her from pain, Vans would attack neck and chest, and then the psychological pressure would become a much worse torment. That's why the young master demands Lucia apologize to her father, her only mercy. The protagonist regrets her past, and the shame of her stupidity eats her up. The protagonist never imagined a god could be so incredibly beautiful. A silent death and peace. Attention. Affection, a bit of warmth, that's what she longed for, what she pleaded for. And all this time, she has only done one thing, curse. For Lucia, this duel isn't over, and nothing is more pathetic than thanking her opponent's mercy in this situation. Defeat is inevitable. She can no longer reach him with her weapon, and even if she could, she'd lose her advantage, and Vances already knew that. But precisely there lay the opportunity to overcome her fears, and not hold back on her possibilities. The moment Vances believed in his victory was when Lucia decided to play her trump card, threatening her rival with the tip of the spear. The brave Lady Lucia declared that this duel belonged to her, but if she had acted like before, Vances would never have fallen into the trap, because Lucia constantly trained her hands were full of scratches. She went so far as to do everything possible to win, and she won this duel. Everyone was shocked by the outcome of the battle, even Miracle Rodbell Lucia. She demanded her lord announce the decision regarding the duel. She needed a clear answer, and as soon as possible, since time was against her even little Miracle, to forgive those who hurt and betrayed her for her own peace of mind. Being there in the depths of darkness was all Lucia wished, for the essence of Evius ordered the young girl to remember her family Rothbell. She expected an honest answer from her father. His lordship valued his little daughter a lot and wanted to maintain the image of the ideal father. Interrupting their conversation was Selak Malid, commander of the 2nd Division of Magical Knights, and until a decision was made, he requested to express his opinion on this duel. Everyone was puzzled by what Selak was scheming. Everyone was waiting to hear what he wanted to say to avoid that outcome in the fight. Selax pointed at the broken spear. From the moment the spear was damaged, it was unable to deliver a normal strike, and that was written in the regulations. He knew that too, but Ian interrupted the conversation. He wasn't going to let Salak ruin everything. These are desperate attempts to distort the truth, since Vance has lost his sword in the end, a mere show to give the Duke. An excuse to change the results. Despite everything, his lordship proclaimed the verdict that everyone had been eagerly awaiting. He started with the man who has served the respected Rothbell house for a long time. It was Kelak Malid, the commander of the 2nd Squadron of Magical Knights, arrogant and cruel by nature. The scoundrels who used her deceived her, and then threw her into the abyss. The god was sure she longed, but the Duke valued his ruthless determination. He gets everything no matter what, which is why he became Vance's mentor, Kelak. Is the perfect example of how a ruler should be cold, but perhaps he was wrong. Vance's lost control, and became uncontrollable and undisciplined. Selak's expectations were in vain. The Duke proclaimed the verdict and named Lucia Rodbell the winner, and anyone who dares to question his decision and challenge the Rothbell house will be executed. Lady Lucia not only celebrated the victory, but the Duke's fair decision. From now on, his lordship appointed Rixus as Lucia Rothwell's tutor. The training was worth it, and what she overcame without fear focused on her goal paid off. The Duke, firmly holding his little daughter Miracle's hand, he left the hall. A week passed after the duel, and during that time, the attitude of the servants towards Lucia changed drastically. Now she was not just a bastard to ignore as was customary. It was very entertaining for Lucia. Knowing the real reason why the Duke kept her in the palace made not just Lady Lucia happy, to destroy their lives with her own hands. With her great power, revenge was possible. All the glory of the Rothbells, their happiness, their home, but also her faithful assistant Maureen. However, the most significant change was that Banches stopped bothering her, and although Banches seemed calm, inside he was seething, not forgetting his defeat. Lady Lucia wasn't too keen on paying attention to that because once a wicked man tried to get rid of her. And now it was her turn to do the same. Lady Lucia's training continued. Now she would focus on the main disciplines. And also at the request of her master, Alan, her living conditions were improved. The Duke called Alan and asked him to take care of a very important matter. The commander was very worried since His Majesty never gave him tasks outside the division. This matter was the dismissal of Sir Selak Malid, commander of the 2nd Division. Malid's dismissal at the Duke's request was due to him not training Vances properly in this recap Manhwa. He was only frustrating Vances' potential, and the Duke had even set his sights on a new candidate for commander of the 2nd Division. Now Alan feared that he too could be easily replaced. Alan explained to the Duke that the departure of the 2nd commander could undermine the morale of the division. His Highness handed Aya a notebook and ordered him not to worry about anything. Everything was based on Lucia's sacrifice. Her family built their sandcastle by crushing the girl in the foundations. In the past, little Lucia solved her problem. The moment came when Malid learned of his dismissal. He regretted it and didn't understand how it had happened. He believed that all his efforts had gone to waste because of childish games, and this was told to him by Alan himself. Accusing him, Malid lunged furiously at him. Alan stood firm, accepting Malid's accusations without fear as he possessed inner strength and courage. If she really thought she could escape with death, she was fooling herself. It was obvious to her that God wouldn't help her just for fun. This deal was a contract with the god of the dungeon he promised, to help her in exchange for her help to escape. His only desire was to get out of the damn infinite darkness. And Lucia Rothbell was the only one who could do it. Without magic or the blessing of the Rothbell house, the heroine felt insignificant. However, according to the god, she still didn't know her power. Lucia lived like an empty shell, unaware that her power had been stolen. The girl couldn't believe that the god knew about her true nature before discovering who stole her power. She had to think of the Rothbells and her true... A god appeared to Lucia, the embodiment of evil, and then she decided to ask for help from the long-repressed and erased feeling of hatred without wishing to die. The protagonist wanted them to be unhappy. Those who threw her into Abisu and hurt her to the end didn't deserve forgiveness for that. The strong-spirited girl was ready to seal a pact with God. The path the protagonist would tread could be drenched in blood. Only groans and curses could be heard on the sides. God swore, with a sealed kiss, that they would see each other again soon. The day Vances locked up his sister, the girl was desperately trying to get out, begging him to open the door. But Vances Rothbell was relentless. He only waited for the moment when Lucia would break down in tears. The poisonous Carcho was the only snake that matched his description unexpectedly. The noise the girl was making suddenly stopped. Mantisa was furious that the girl from the Rothbell clan couldn't control the snake. Upon entering, the servant realized that the snake had bitten Lucia somewhere in the room. Something like that could only scare the insignificant without magic. Right before Banchisa's eyes, a strange little pouch flew out of the room. Something moved inside, and unexpectedly a snake shot out. Deity to escape and made a contract with him. A contract that could grant her the power of revenge. She loved it. No one dares to challenge the aristocracy. The venomous creature lunged at the servant, sinking its teeth into him. The terrified boy didn't understand what was happening. At that moment, the doors burst open and a satisfied Lucia peeked her head in with relief. The young girl finally stepped out of the closed room. But now no one could imagine who was hiding behind that defenseless girl. From that moment on, everything changed in the girl's life. Now Lucia knew for sure that she had returned to the past. And that servant who released the snake in her room was still the same, and the same Vans who mocked her. Everything remained the same. But this time, it would be the servant who would lose his taste, not Lucia, and now everything would be different. At that moment, the protagonist began to understand what the sovereign meant when he offered her his help. Lucia's gaze changed, becoming more confident and bold, which even scared the heir himself, unable to believe what was happening. A surprised Banshee didn't expect a simple girl to be capable of such tricks. Her skills seemed like a fun spectacle to him, and he decided to pretend he didn't even notice. Impulsive character. The most powerful magic in the Empire. The blessing of lineage Rothwell magic was the dream and admiration of every wizard, and inability to control his own emotions. That was the essence of Vans. He organized various braggadocios, ostentatious to cover up his vulnerability. Now he understood why he was so afraid of Vans, and why he seemed so terrifying. This time when Lucia looked at Vances, he seemed insignificant to her. Vances thought the girl was out of her mind, or that she had gone crazy, but Lucia didn't hold back and kept telling him he wasn't as smart as the eldest son of Estio, and that he didn't have the character that everyone would love him for like Miracle. Even if you took away the name Rodbell, he was no different from Lucia. She threatened him with the sword, because someone like her shouldn't say that to the direct heir. He was seriously compared to an insignificant worm. And even with his own magic, this kid was incapable of controlling it well. Maybe it was time to remind Lucia that Vances was very different. He never considered himself equal to his sister. His pathetic attempts to show off seemed like an embarrassing spectacle to the girl. Not only did the heroine consider Avances Rodbell an idiot, but in this life he was destined